Imagine you're just an everyday person, someone with a family, dreams, and a clear sense of right and wrong. Yet one day, you find yourself in a room, given a simple command. Right in front of you sits a stranger, their hands tied. A man in a lab coat instructs you to press a button. It's just an experiment, he says. But then the person jolts as if shocked by electricity. You hesitate, unsure. The authority figure urges you to continue. Pause for a moment. What would you do? This isn't fiction. It's the chilling reality of the Milgram experiment, one of the most unsettling studies in psychology. Ordinary individuals, teachers, clerks, parents were told to administer what they believed were painful, even lethal electric shocks to a stranger. And astonishingly, over 65% obeyed, pushing the shocks to maximum levels, even as the person screamed in agony. But that was just an experiment. What happens when this kind of blind obedience plays out in real life? Step back to 1944, in a quiet European town. A soldier, once a kind family man, hesitates as he faces innocent civilians, pleading with their eyes. His hands tremble, but then he hears the command, "Do your duty," and he pulls the trigger. He wasn't a monster, just a person like you or me. So how does a good person commit such horrors? We often think evil is the work of heartless psychopaths. But what if, under certain conditions, you or I could do the same? Psychology shows us the most terrifying truth. Evil doesn't exist just in others, it exists in all of us. History repeats this time and time again. The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, atrocities committed by ordinary people. Not because they were born evil, but because a hidden process slowly erodes their morality, distorts their view of the world, and turns them into monsters. The most frightening part, they don't even realize what's happening. This transformation isn't sudden. It's a gradual descent in almost invisible steps. It starts with small moral compromises, a bit of obedience, a hint of rationalization. Before you know it, you've crossed a line you once swore you'd never cross. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. Because this process is happening right now, all around or in offices, politics, social media, everyday life. If you don't recognize it, you might become part of it. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly how this works, the 5 psychological forces that slowly reshape a person's ethics, and most importantly, how you can protect yourself. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the moment you say, "I would never do that," you're most at risk. Most people believe evil is a conscious choice, that only inherently bad individuals commit monstrous acts. But history tells a darker story. Under the right conditions, anyone can be pulled down a path of destruction, not because they wake up one day deciding to abandon morality, but because they get swept up in a psychological current they don't even see. This descent isn't random. It follows a predictable, systematic process, a pattern repeated across history, turning everyday people into participants of terrible crimes. I call this the corruption cycle 5-stage. Transformation, explaining how good people become monsters. Stage 1. Moral erosion. No one jumps straight into darkness. It begins with small compromises, little ethical slips that feel harmless, white lies, tiny betrayals, bending your values just this once. But each step chips away at your moral foundation. What once felt unthinkable slowly becomes acceptable. Stage 2. Obedience to authority. Here's where it gets chilling. The famous Milgram experiment proved ordinary people will commit horrific acts just because an authority tells them to. Soldiers in wars, employees enforcing unethical policies, citizens upholding unjust laws, they all convince themselves, "I'm just doing my job." Obedience strips away responsibility, hiding evil behind a mask of duty. Stage 3. Group identity. Humans crave belonging, it's wired into us. But the us versus them instinct can trap us. Once we see others as outsiders, dehumanization follows. History shows that when we stop seeing others as human, atrocities become justifiable. Stage 4. Self-justification and moral licensing. No one wants to be the villain. When our actions conflict with our values, our minds twist the story. "I had no choice," or "I did it for the greater good." This self-deception fuels the worst crimes. And here's the scary part, we all do it. Excusing one wrong because we see ourselves as good pulls us deeper into the cycle. Stage 5. Dehumanization. This is the point of no return. When you strip others of their humanity, nothing stops cruelty. Morality no longer applies. This stage, has fueled genocides, oppressive regimes, and even today's online hate mobs. Once dehumanization sets in, a monster is born. This cycle has played out again and again in wars, governments, social movements, even personal relationships. The terrifying truth: anyone can fall into it. Understanding it is the first step to breaking free. Next, we'll dive into each stage in detail, starting with moral erosion, the quiet, dangerous process that begins the descent. Evil doesn't shout. It sneaks in through small decisions, enough to snowball. It's a slow, nearly invisible slide dot. At the start, it might be an innocent compromiser, little lie, a tiny betrayal, maybe bending rules to help a friend, staying silent in the face of wrongdoing, or making a decision that betrays your values but seems necessary. Because nothing bad happens immediately, your brain learns, this isn't so bad. Our minds naturally resist guilt. When our actions contradict our morals, we experience cognitive dissonance, mental discomfort. Instead of admitting fault, the brain rewrites reality so we can still see ourselves as good. Rationalizations like "it's just once," or "no, one's hurt," become common. These justifications erode our moral boundaries, making the next compromise easier. What once was shocking becomes normal. It's never just one act. It's a slippery slope. History is full of examples. Watergate started with minor political spying and escalated into a full-blown scandal. Corporate fraud scandals began with small financial manipulations that snowballed. War crimes were often preceded by minor moral slips, following orders without question until things spiraled out of control. Psychologists call this the foot in the door effect. Agreeing to small acts makes it easier to agree to larger, more harmful ones. The most dangerous lie: "I would never do that," because believing you're immune leaves you vulnerable. No one thinks they can become evil until it's too late. Next, we'll explore the second stage, obedience to authority, and how it can override even the strongest personal morals, pushing otherwise decent people toward unimaginable acts. Most of us like to believe we have full control over our actions, that our morals are rock solid, but history and psychology paint a different picture. Under certain conditions, even well-meaning people can commit terrible acts and, often without realizing it. This is the power of obedience, one of the strongest and most dangerous forces in human nature. It can strip away personal responsibility and turn ordinary individuals into instruments of harm. Take the famous Milgram experiment. From the early 1960s, participants were told they were helping with a learning study. Their job: to deliver electric shocks to a learner in another room every time the learner gave a wrong answer. With each mistake, the shock level increased. The learner, actually an actor, screamed in pain, begged to stop, and eventually fell silent, implying serious harm. Yet, under the calm directive of a scientist in a white lab coat, a staggering 65% of participants pushed the shocks all the way to the highest level of 450 volts. Despite believing they were seriously hurting or even killing someone, they kept going simply because they were told to do so. This wasn't just a weird experiment. It was a glimpse into how normal people like you and me, can surrender their sense of right and wrong when faced with authoritative commands. The same excuse, "I was just following orders," has been echoed by soldiers, police officers, and ordinary citizens across some of humanity's darkest moments. During the Nazi era, many concentration camp guards were not sadistic monsters, but ordinary men who surrendered their morality to authority. Similarly, in 1968, US soldiers committed the My Lai massacre, killing hundreds of innocent Vietnamese civilians simply because they were ordered to do so. Corporate scandals also often start with employees following unethical commands, convinced they are not personally responsible. Obeying authority can feel safe, but is actually a deadly psychological trap. It removes the sense of personal accountability and allows evil to grow under the guise of doing one's duty. Philip Zimbardo's 1971 Stanford prison experiment starkly illustrates how obedience escalates cruelty. College students randomly assigned as guards quickly internalized their authority roles and abused their prisoners. What began as a simple role-play spiraled into psychological torment in just a few days. The guards weren't acting due to explicit orders, but because they had internalized authority over others, showing how power and obedience can twist behavior without direct commands. The experiment was shut down early due to ethical concerns. Zimbardo later reflected that most people are capable of significant character transformations when caught in powerful social dynamics. The sobering takeaway here isn't just that people obey harmful orders, it's that they don't believe they would until they find themselves doing it. Ask yourself, would you have pushed that shock button? Would you have become a sadistic God? Most say never, yet every participant in those studies felt the same until they found themselves crossing the line. Obedience isn't about being inherently evil, it's about social conditioning. From childhood, we're taught to respect authority: parents, teachers, bosses, law enforcement. This programming runs so deep that when an authoritative command comes, compliance is often the default, not resistance. That's how perfectly ordinary people end up doing terrible things, not from malice, but from failing to question the orders they're given. To resist this force, you must develop conscious moral awareness. When you're given an order, especially one that feels wrong, pause and ask yourself, would I do this if no one told me to? Would I still feel like a good person afterward? If history were watching this moment, how would it judge me? Obedience without morality is not loyalty, it's surrender. But the surrender to authority is only part of the story. There's an even deeper and more insidious force at work: the power of group identity. Humans are social creatures wired to belong. From family to friendships, political parties to nations, our sense of self is wrapped up in groups. This need to belong is essential for survival, but it has a dark flip side. When we see ourselves as part of us, we naturally view those outside our group as different, even less human. This is the infamous us versus them trap, one of the strongest psychological forces turning good people into monsters. Psychologists have studied this tribalism extensively. Henry Tojful's minimal group experiments showed how simply being assigned to a random group, even by something as trivial as flipping a coin, makes people favor their own group and discriminate against outsiders. Remarkably, participants were even willing to harm another group, sometimes at no gain to themselves. This reveals a disturbing truth: group loyalty can overpower logic, fairness, and even morality. If people are willing to discriminate against a randomly assigned group, imagine how much stronger the effect becomes when the lines are drawn by race, religion, nationality, or ideology. This is why cruelty is so often justified, as long as it's against the enemy. History is littered with examples. Nazis dehumanized Jews by calling them rats in Rwanda. Tutsi people were labeled cockroaches, slaveholders. Called African people savages. The enemy is blamed for all societal problems, stripped of individuality, and painted as faceless threats. Dehumanization follows, making mass violence seem justifiable. By the time violence begins, the psychological groundwork is already set. For the perpetrators, the victims are no longer human. You don't need to dig through history to see this today. It's happening right now, every day. Social media amplifies the us versus them thinking, turning political opponents into traitors or evil. Online outrage fuels cancel culture and harassment. Stripping empathy away, political propaganda paints enemies as monsters to justify aggression. All these forms of modern dehumanization start small but can explode into real-world harm. So how do you resist the tribalist trap? It begins with awareness. The moment you start seeing an entire group as the enemy, question it. Ask, who benefits from dividing USI people as individuals, not stereotypes or faceless masses? Resist propaganda and narratives that paint others as less than human. History teaches us one undeniable truth: when we stop seeing others as human, we become capable of anything. But the slide into evil doesn't stop here. Once we start turning against others, our minds begin to twist reality further to protect our sense of self. This brings us to the next stage: self-justification and moral licensing. No one wants to admit they're the villain. When people do things that clash with their values, the mind rewrites the story. I had no choice. I did it for the greater good. This is how some of history's worst perpetrators rationalize their crimes, and the nightmare is, we all do it. When we excuse a wrong because we see ourselves as good, we deepen the corruption cycle. This self-deception is fueled by cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable feeling when actions and morals clash. Instead of accepting guilt, the brain creates justifications to protect our self-image. Maybe it was a one-time thing, or necessary for a cause, or that the victim deserved it. This process distorts morality. Soon, the line between right and wrong blurs. Throughout history, Countless atrocities have stemmed from people believing their cause is just, allowing them to commit evil in its name. Religious wars fought in defense of faith, political purges under the guise of cleansing society's censorship, justified by protecting the people. Dictators, corrupt leaders, military commanders justify horrific acts by convincing themselves they are heroes. Their self-justification is so powerful they really believe it. But self-justification isn't just for tyrants. It's a trap we all fall into. A student cheats but tells themselves they deserved it. An employee mistreats a colleague and blames provocation. Drivers run red lights telling themselves everyone does it. Every excuse pushes us further down a dangerous slope. When someone says, "I had no choice," or "it was for the greater good," they're already slipping. So how do you stop this? Notice when you feel the urge to justify something, stop and ask if you're making excuses. Hold yourself accountable. Be brutally honest about your choices. Challenge moral licensing. Good deeds don't give free passes for harms yourself with people who challenge your thinking. Avoid echo chambers. Seek voices that force you to question yourself. The scariest truth is that the road to becoming a monster doesn't start with evil intent. It begins with a small justification. Continue next time by exploring the final and most dangerous stage of this cycle, dehumanization, and how it breaks down the last barriers holding us back from cruelty. No one sees themselves as the villain, especially when it comes to acts that go against their own values. That's the heart of self-justification and moral licensing. Psychological tricks our minds play to maintain a positive self-image even when we behave badly. Imagine this. You pride yourself on being honest, but one day you find yourself lying. Your brain is faced with a tough choice: admit you were wrong and feel bad, or rewrite the story to protect your self-image. Most people choose the latter. You tell yourself the lie was for a good reason, or that it didn't really hurt anyone. This mental balancing act shields you from guilt and lets you keep seeing yourself as a good person. This is moral licensing in action, a phenomenon psychologists have studied extensively. It explains how doing something good can give us the mental credit to justify later questionable or unethical behavior. For example, after donating to charity, a person might feel entitled to indulge in a selfish act without feeling guilty. The brain treats past good deeds like moral points. It can spend later to excuse bad ones. Research shows this isn't rare, it's deeply rooted in human psychology. In one study, participants who shopped at environmentally friendly stores acted less altruistically afterward, like sharing less money or even cheating. Their prior good behavior gave them unconscious permission to behave less morally later. This sense of entitlement can be subtle and insidious. You might tell yourself, "I've been so good lately, I deserve this," or "I worked hard, so skipping the gym today is fine." It's a way of tricking ourselves into feeling we're still in control, even when our choices conflict with our long-term values. Moral licensing isn't just about small everyday decisions. It plays a role in some of history's worst atrocities. When people believe they are acting for a greater good, they more easily rationalize harmful actions. Religious wars justified millions of deaths in the name of defending faith. Political purges wiped out entire groups under the claim of societal cleansing, and dictators silenced dissent while maintaining they were protecting their people. This mental loophole makes it easier to commit evil without feeling like a villain. Powerful figures often rewrite reality to justify crimes, claiming they're heroes, righteous defenders, or victims themselves. The more power and influence someone holds, the easier it becomes to convince themselves their harmful actions are warranted. But moral licensing isn't just a tool for the powerful. Everyone falls into this trap. A student cheats on a test but convinces themselves they studied enough to deserve it. An employee mistreats a co-worker and rationalizes that the colleague had it coming. A driver runs a red light, thinking everyone does it. Each excuse chips away at the moral boundary, making unethical choices feel more normal over time. The most dangerous thing about moral licensing is how easily it snowballs. Small justifications pave the way for bigger ones. The moment someone says, "I had no choice," or "it was for the greater good," that person is already sliding down a slippery slope. So how can you fight back against this self-deception? When you feel the urge to justify or excuse an action, stop and question it. Ask, "Am I making an excuse?" Hold yourself honestly accountable. Don't let mental loopholes let you off the hook. Challenge moral licensing by remembering that past good deeds don't give a free pass for harm. Surround yourself with people who question your choices and avoid echo chambers that reinforce your justifications. The scary truth is that many of history's great evils started with this kind of self-deception. The road to becoming a monster doesn't start with dark intentions, starts with small, seemingly harmless justifications. This brings us to the final, most dangerous stage in this corrosive cycle, dehumanization. Some point in every great crime against humanity, ordinary people cross a line where their victims stop being seen as fellow human beings. Instead, they become the enemy, vermin, or threats. This is dehumanization, the psychological point of no return. When someone dehumanizes others, empathy disappears. The mental barriers that make harming someone feel wrong crumble. Without seeing others as human, morality no longer applies. How does this happen? The brain has an incredible ability to empathize. We actually mirror the feelings of others and feel their pain. That's why hurting someone is naturally difficult for most people. But there's a loophole. If the brain stops seeing a person as fully human, empathy shuts down throughout history. This trick of the mind has been used to justify horrors. Nazis called Jewish people rats, stripping them of humanity. In the Rwandan genocide, Tutsis were described as cockroaches. During American slavery, black people were treated as property rather than people. Language is chosen carefully to erase humanity. When the victim becomes an object, cruelty feels permissibly necessary. This dehumanization process isn't just ancient history. It's happening all around us. War and political conflict rely on propaganda that paints enemies as monsters. Soldiers are trained to think of targets, not people, making killing easier. Civil wars and ethnic conflicts start when neighbors see each other as threats. Social media turns disagreements into battles of us versus them, fueling hate speech, cancel culture, and harassment. Online, the disconnect of digital communication makes it effortless to attack others without empathy. Political discourse often turns into crude tribal conflict, intensifying the us versus them mindset. This mental switch to seeing others as less than human is a gateway to cruelty. Once flipped, the door to violence swings wide open. Dehumanization doesn't just allow cruelty, it encourages participation in it. When people believe victims deserve their fate, their moral compass breaks down. Cruel acts become easier and easier to commit. History's worst atrocities, genocide, war, crimes, mass violence, are rarely carried out by monsters. They are committed by people who lost sight of humanity in their victims. This complete descent is irreversible. Once the line of dehumanization is crossed, there's no turning back. The only way to resist this final stage is through conscious, deliberate effort. Watch for language that dehumanizes or demonizes groups. Question labels like parasites, vermin, or enemies. See individuals behind the labels and challenge stereotypes. Refuse to join or fuel hate mobs online or in person. Choose empathy actively. Remind yourself everyone has feelings, thoughts, and struggles just like you. Empathy is a choice one we must make constantly to keep humanity alive, because once dehumanization takes hold, nothing else matters. If everything we've covered, the erosion of morality, blind obedience, tribalism, self-justification, and dehumanization seems like a string of unfortunate human flaws, here's a deeper truth. These are not flaws but built-in survival mechanisms. At the core of every stage in the corruption cycle lies one primal instinct: survival. Moral erosion helps the brain avoid guilt to protect self-image. Obeying authority was a survival strategy in early human societies. Group identity evolved to protect us through belonging. Self-justification keeps psychological stability in contradiction. Dehumanization suppresses empathy when a group is perceived as threat. These mechanisms evolved to help humans survive a dangerous world, but can be hijacked in today's society to justify cruelty and evil. That's why history keeps repeating itself. The capacity for darkness isn't some rarity, it's wired into all of us. But that doesn't mean resistance is impossible. It means we must cultivate radical self-awareness, the willingness to look hard at ourselves and admit, I'm just as vulnerable as anyone else. If you ever think, I would never do that, you're already at risk. The only defense is conscious moral reflection, questioning your own thoughts, actions, and biases constantly. Every time you justify a small unethical act, follow orders blindly, or demonize a group. Pause. Ask yourself, am I being manipulated by my own instincts? The antidote to dehumanization is radical empathy, the conscious choice to recognize the humanity in everyone, even those you fear or disagree with. In the end, good and evil don't run between people, but through each of our hearts. The line is thin. The moment you believe you're immune is the moment it begins to fade. But knowledge and awareness can be shields. Now that you know this, what will you do differently? Because this isn't just history or psychology, it's about who you become. Every day, the same forces that shaped some of humanity's darkest moments shape our world, our choices, and our actions right now. The question is, will you recognize them and resist? When you take a step back and really look at the psychological forces that shape us, you start to see a pattern, not just a coincidence, but a cycle that traps even the best among us. This cycle doesn't rely on evil intentions or monstrous personalities. Instead, it exploits deeply rooted survival instincts, twisting them in ways that can lead ordinary people down terrifying paths. So how do we fight back? How do we break free from this cycle before it's too late? The key is radical being aware is not just about knowing what's happening around you, but understanding what's happening inside you. The instincts, biases, and pressures that quietly shape your choices every day. The moment you think, I would never do that, you're stepping onto a slippery slope. That belief blinds you to your own vulnerabilities and makes you less likely to question your actions or the orders you receive. One of the most effective tools to fight this is daily self. You've probably heard the idea of looking in the mirror and asking yourself tough questions before you act. But what does that really mean? Imagine if every morning or before a major decision, you mentally ask, if someone else did what I just did, would I see them as a good person? This mirror test cuts through the excuses we make for ourselves and forces us to confront our own ethical blind spots. It catches us before a single small compromise becomes a gateway to bigger ones. When we see the same behavior in others, we usually judge it harshly. Why not hold ourselves to the same standard? Another critical defense is questioning authority. Obedience feels natural because it's safe, predictable, and often socially rewarded. But history proves that unthinking compliance creates a breeding ground for atrocities. The next time someone in power tells you to do something that feels wrong, stop and ask, would I make this choice if no one were telling me to? Are there other ways to resist or refuse? Blind obedience is not loyalty, it's surrender. And surrender comes at a high cost to your integrity and humanity. Of course, none of this is easy. Our tribal instincts are similarly challenging to overcome. The moment you start seeing a group of people as the enemy or less than us, you're already trapped in the us system mentality, a psychological minefield that primes us for cruelty. To counter this, radical empathy is essential. Radical empathy means more than just feeling sorry for others. It's an active, intentional effort to see people as individuals with their own fears, hopes, and human complexities, even when they seem very different from you or even threaten your worldview. This can be extraordinarily difficult, especially in today's world, where social media and sensational news often amplify divisions and outrage. The antidote lies in slowing down, listening, and engaging with perspectives that challenge your own. The more you humanize others, the less power tribalism and dehumanization have over you. Speaking up also plays a critical role. Sometimes the easiest way for evil to grow is through silence. When you witness injustice, unethical behavior, or harmful groupthink, saying nothing allows it to fester. Moral courage means standing up, even if it's uncomfortable or if you're the only one willing to do so. Remember, history isn't shaped only by great leaders or villains, but by ordinary people who choose to act or remain silent. The world needs more people willing to speak out, not just good people, but brave people. Pulling all of this together, radical self-awareness, questioning authority, practicing empathy, and moral courage, creates a framework, not just for resisting the corruption cycle, but for fostering a culture that values humanity and ethics above blind allegiance or hatred. So, let's summarize where we've come. Moral erosion starts the cycle with small, seemingly harmless compromises that chip away at personal ethics. Obedience to authority then strips away personal responsibility, convincing people to act against their own morals under orders. Tribalism and group identity turn empathy inward and suspicion outward, dividing us into us versus them. Self-justification cushions the mind from guilt, allowing rationalizations that make harmful acts feel acceptable or even righteous. Finally, dehumanization hardens hearts and destroys empathy, opening the door to monstrous cruelty without remorse. Yet, embedded in this cycle lies hope, a way to resist and reclaim our humanity. Awareness is the first and most crucial step. By recognizing these forces, questioning our instincts, and making deliberate ethical choices every day, we can interrupt the cycle. The stakes couldn't be higher because, as history has repeatedly shown, this isn't about a few bad actors on the sidelines. The capacity for darkness lives within us all, and the line between good and evil passes through every heart. This knowledge isn't meant to terrify you or make you doubt your goodness, but to encourage vigilance and humility. It's a call to hold ourselves accountable for our actions and to build societies that nurture empathy, critical thinking, and responsibility. The forces we've explored, obedience, tribalism, justifications, dehumanization, aren't going anywhere. They've been with us since humanity's dawn, but our ability to recognize and resist them is where our true strength lies. So what will you do now? How will you guard your moral compass when the pressure to compromise grows? How will you hold yourself and others accountable? Who will you open your heart to, beyond the division of us and them? And when the moment to speak or act comes, will you rise to the challenge? Because ultimately, the choice is ours every day, in countless small ways. The story of humanity's darkness is still being written, but so is the story of our redemption, and it starts with you. So, start with yourself. Make conscious, ongoing reflection a habit. It can be as simple as asking yourself daily, did I act with integrity today? Where did I justify something I knew was wrong? Did I blindly accept authority or question it? This honest self-check is the foundation of radical self-awareness, and it's what keeps small compromises from spiraling into larger failures. Next, nourish empathy actively. In our fast-paced, polarized world, it can be tempting to categorize people quickly based on labels or group identity. But empathy requires effort, a willingness to listen, understand, and appreciate others' humanity, even when it challenges your views. Seek out conversations and stories that broaden your perspective. Challenge your own biases. Empathy isn't weakness. It's the bridge that keeps us connected as humans. Then, cultivate moral courage. This means more than knowing what's right. It means acting on it, even when it's uncomfortable or risky. Whether it's calling out injustice at work, standing up against hateful rhetoric online, or refusing to follow unethical orders, your actions matter. Change often starts with small acts of courage. Be the person who doesn't look away. Surround yourself with communities of accountability, people who encourage you to be honest, who question ideas constructively, and who help guard against groupthink and tribalism. No one is immune to these psychological forces, but with support, it's easier to notice when you're slipping and pull yourself back. Also, critically evaluate the information you consume. We live in an age where misinformation and propaganda are powerful tools that manipulate our perceptions and emotions. Be skeptical of simplistic narratives that divide the world into enemies and allies. Look for multiple perspectives, verify facts, and resist the urge to share outrage before understanding the full context. Remember, resistance is not a one-time decision, but a continuous journey. Human nature has its darkness, but also an incredible capacity for reflection, growth, and kindness. By choosing to stay aware, asking hard questions, fostering empathy, and speaking out, you can make a difference not just for yourself, but for those around you. Finally, recognize the power you hold. History's greatest atrocities didn't happen suddenly. They happened because ordinary people made choices to obey, to look away, to dehumanize. But those same ordinary people also have the power to reject those paths. The future depends on countless small acts of courage and integrity, repeated day after day. In the end, the line between good and evil isn't a place far away or a battle only for heroes. It's a path we all walk, winding through every decision, every conversation, every moment of temptation and choice. So ask yourself, which path will I take? Will you, like so many before, fall to the slow erosion of your values, or will you stand, vigilant, a guardian of your own humanity and conscience? The forces that turn good people into monsters are powerful, but not unstoppable. They thrive in silence and ignorance, but falter in awareness and action. Be brave, be reflective, be empathetic, and when the moment comes, choose humanity. Because the world doesn't just need good people, it needs people willing to be better every single day. Thank you for listening. Let's all do our part to break the cycle.